made a mistake, and my gosh, a mistake is not a crime. It just isn't. It just isn't in our freedom-loving country that we're going to put you in jail for a mistake you made, even though you took all the training, even though you did everything, you made a mistake. And what does the taser people say? Well, we recognize there are confusions, there are mistakes, we recognize that. Well, if they do recognize it, let me ask you a question. Why do they have the taser shaped like a gun? They have yellow on it and all that stuff, but why is it shaped like a gun? Why isn't it a flashlight? Why is it in a holster on their belt? Why isn't it up here by their chest? Think about it. Why? Because they can sell more of them if it's shaped like a gun in a holster. Of course, they're in marketing. They're marketing it. So, and when you look at that mistake that she made, you look at the character witnesses we called. And character witnesses weren't there. They've just known Kimberly Potter for many years, and they think the world of her. And they say that she's a peaceful person, not a bully. She's never been accused of a abuse of force, of being a bully cop in 26 years. That's a record. Believe that. She's peaceful. And she's a law-abiding person. You heard the witnesses. One witness said she was like my mother when he was a neighbor of hers. And one of the reasons that you are a good person throughout your life is when something like this happens. When you're falsely accused of a crime and you're innocent, you go back and you say, oh my gosh, I've been a good person all my life. I want to get some people that know me and have them tell the jury that I'm a good person. That's one of the reasons you are a good person. You want to rely on your reputation. And by the way, in the instructions you get, there's a instruction. Character evidence. In case you've heard, excuse me, in case you have heard evidence as to the character of the defendant, you should consider such evidence with all the other evidence in the case in determining whether or not the prosecution has proven the defendant's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. So our law, our jury instructions recognize that a reputation, character evidence is important in a criminal case. Finally, and I'm almost done, don't clap. We have Kim Potter. She testified. You saw her. I don't believe, and rely on your notes, I wrote it down somewhere here that they claim she admitted something. I contest that. Look at your notes. Kim Potter took the stand, and she said she saw Johnson, that she saw him and he had a look on his face she'd never seen before. And that was right before she said, taser, taser. Now, they want to argue that the body-worn camera, if we run it real slow, you can't see that. Well, of course you can. The body-worn camera is here. It's on the body. Her head's up here. Even though she's 5'3", she can still see in the car. That's an outrageous argument. It makes no sense at all. They're relying on the slow motion of the body-worn camera, not the fast speed. If you saw it in fast speed, it's chaos. And then she tells you about why she became a police officer. She became a police officer because with his grade school, a police officer, she knows his name, Mike McGee, came to school and talked about bicycles. She decided that day to be a police officer. She was a school officer, letting elementary kids walk across the street when she was in junior high. She was an explorer in high school, continued to be an explorer, went to college at St. Mary's, took law enforcement and sociology, and took the training, first worked at the Anoka State Hospital, then she got a job in Brooklyn Center. And she worked there for 26 years, ladies and gentlemen, 26 years in which she volunteered for domestic, helped the victims in domestics, going to the death of officers and handling that. Crisis intervention, all of these things she did, and there's other ones I'm not going to, that she was very interested in helping people. And that's a sign of good character. Does that tell you that she did not know she had a gun? Of course it does. Does that tell you that she used reasonable force, deadly force, because she saw Johnson? She didn't know she had a gun, but she did shoot her taser. And by the way, there is an instruction in here about using the taser. And the reason that's there is because I believe Stoughton said that, she couldn't even use non-deadly force. It doesn't find her not guilty, the non-deadly force. The judge will tell you that in the instructions. But it will also tell you about non-deadly force. And Stoughton, he would say, no, you can't use non-deadly force. You can't use a taser. You have to just let them go. Does that make sense, ladies and gentlemen? So that's why that's there, because Stoughton said that. You decide the credibility of Stoughton. That's it. I'm done, ladies and gentlemen. I probably will sit down and remember 10 other things I should have said, but I'm finished. The Potter family thanks you for listening to this case. It's a very emotional case, but you have to look at the law and the evidence about, did she have a right to use deadly force? Of course she did, whether she knew it or not. All those officers said that. She didn't know she had a gun, so how could she consciously, recklessly handle one? And above all, in the first one, causation. Everything they were doing as good police officers until Daunte Wright took it upon himself to flee. He even left after he was shot, purposely. So, on behalf of my client and her family, Mr. Ng and myself, and Amanda Montgomery, the brains behind the operation, we thank you for your careful attention in this case. And if you look at the evidence, the believable evidence, and follow the judge's instructions, it's not a difficult case. They failed in every element, miserably failed. And I hope that you come to the fair conclusion of not guilty based on the evidence. Kim Potter isn't guilty of these crimes. Thank you.
Members of the jury, we're going to take a 10-minute break before the state's rebuttal, okay?
All right, there's Judge Regina Chu calling a 10-minute break after the closing argument of the defense in the trial of Kim Potter. She's the former Minnesota police officer charged with involuntary manslaughter for the shooting death of Daunte Wright, a young 20-year-old black man killed by Kim Potter when she says she mistook her taser for her gun. She had her gun when she thought she had her taser and shot Daunte Wright. It was a remarkable closing argument there by Kim Potter's defense lawyer, Earl Gray. You heard it there at the end. He's blaming Daunte Wright. The defense is blaming this young man for his own death. And that, in fact, he went in and said in the closing argument, Kim Potter, didn't cause this. Daunte Wright caused this, and that is based on the concept of a superseding cause. That Daunte Wright, who was pulled over because he had an air freshener hanging from his rear view mirror and expired tags, had a wrong turn signal, did try to get away, struggled a little bit, and that resulted in his death, and so he is to blame, is the argument of the defense. They also said the remarkable argument that further proof of his own culpability, Daunte Wright, for his own death, is that he drove away. He could have stayed to get medical attention, is the way defense lawyer Earl Gray said it. He stayed to get medical attention from the people who had just shot him. It was an unusual argument. She also said that she had the right to use deadly force, Kim Potter. That was part of the defense closing argument, that she had no conscious intention of killing Daunte Wright, that this was a mistake and there is a defensive mistake, and that her character is such that she can be believed when she describes her actions that day. I want to bring in our reporter on this case who's been covering it really since the incident happened, and that is Alex Perche, who is with us. Alex, I was really struck by just how bold the defense was. This is a tragic case by any measure, and yet there's the defense lawyer doing his job defending his client, Kim Potter, saying Daunte Wright not deserved this, but he brought it on himself. He is the cause of his own death, and go so far as to say, why did he drive away? Why did he drive away? That shows that he was, some kind of bad person. He drove away from people who were shooting him. All he knew is that they just shot him. Anyway, Alex, what's your take on this defense closing argument?
Well, Terry, I think you're absolutely right there, and also I suspect that whenever we see the prosecution come back out, you're going to hear them battle back a number of things. You brought up Daunte Wright driving away. Well, also, what do you suspect a person who has just been shot, like their capacity to comply, like what is that? And so I anticipate we'll see that. But look, one of the things that struck me, and we recognize that whenever you have the prosecution who gives their closing and then also gives a rebuttal, and so the defense has one shot to kind of get this. We saw the prosecution earlier this morning lay out this argument as to why they believe that Kim Potter should be convicted on both manslaughter 1 and manslaughter 2. And so, there was a moment for the defense off the top here to really kind of battle back against that. We'd heard the prosecution talk about, not being able to realize the difference between a taser and a firearm. Also, the number of steps that Kim Potter took that day during that traffic stop that were ultimately, led to the failing of her training in the shooting of Daunte Wright. And so you saw Earl Gray from the get-go kind of try to battle back against some of that. I want to play a clip here, and then we'll get into it a little bit after.
Before I get into my final argument, or summation, some people call it, we apparently were accused by the state in their argument that we might run you down a rabbit hole of misdirection. Rabbit hole of misdirection. That's what they said. Playing the video, not at the right speed, where it showed chaos, playing it as slow as possible, showing photos, that's the rabbit hole of misdirection. And make no mistake about it, Kimberly, Potter, Johnson, Lucky, and Wright were fighting, struggling, and it was in seconds that happened, not slow motion. So when you go into that jury room, play it like it's supposed to be played, not a rabbit hole of misdirection. Rabbit hole of misdirection, no threat by Daunte Wright. He broke free from a law enforcement officer and took off in his car even after he was shot. No threat. Sympathy for Potter? Well, what are the photos of Daunte Wright doing up there with his child? Does that prove anything on this case? Of course not. They're asking for sympathy, not us.
So you hear that pretty powerful opening there, but it's interesting, this idea of a rabbit hole of misdirection. We talked about how, Terry, in the prosecution's closing arguments, they showed that video frame by frame, the moment where Officer Lucky is hit in the face with a shell from that round that was fired into Dante Wright. The first moment at which you're able to see Sergeant Johnson on the other side of the car, and essentially hear Earl Grey saying that that is a rabbit hole of misdirection. But what was fascinating to me, and I'd be curious, for others to weigh in on this, is throughout this entire closing, we actually didn't see Earl Grey play this video, right? I mean, certainly he's able to, he could if he wanted to, but he steered clear of showing anything from it during his closing, and I think that was probably purposeful on his part, even though he's saying that this is a video that you need to watch at the rate at which it happened in its full speed, as opposed to examining frame by frame.
It's a great observation, Alex, that they talked a lot about it, talked about what might be on there, but didn't show it because it is such a not just horrific, but damning video when you look at what happened. And I want to bring in C.K. Hoffler as our legal expert, trial attorney, former president of the National Bar Association based there in Atlanta. C.K., it's good to see you again. And if I may, just pick up on your take on this closing argument. I thought, look, you're defending your client. You defend a client zealously. It did seem harsh on the person whom everyone recognizes as the victim here. Dante Wright was killed for no reason at all, and yet the thrust of this defense is he is to blame.
I agree. It did appear to be harsh. I like the word that you used, which was remarkable. I found that the closing of the defense was remarkable, but I would not say in a good way. To blame this entire scenario on Dante Wright, when you're stopped by the police, arguably everyone that's stopped by the police, whether it's rightfully or wrongfully, there's some reason why they're stopped if you give the police the benefit of the doubt. So to impute anything that happens, if we just take George Floyd, we just take Breonna Taylor, anything that happens, blame it on the person who's being stopped and not holding the officers to accountability is a huge risk. And I think that is what was done here. I believe that the prosecutor laid out in her closing very methodically an organized case. Of course, she bears the burden of proof, so she's got to lay it out in that way. Organized, she went through the evidence. She wasn't afraid of using the video. She wasn't afraid of looking at the differences between the weapons, between the gun and the taser. The defense, on the other hand, and again, let's remember, the defense doesn't have the burden of proof. What he did is he threw a lot at the wall. He was up there throwing a lot of information, a lot of evidence. Sometimes, in my impression, it was disjointed. But all he has to do really is poke holes in the prosecutor's case. So the prosecutor in rebuttal has got to go back, recalibrate, reorganize, and make some sense out of what the defense has said. Shift it away from Dante Wright. Talk about the superseding event. They've got it, in my humble impression, all wrong. The superseding event would have to have happened after Kim Potter shot him. And so there's a question as, was it before? Was it after? I think that there's a lot of confusion that the prosecutor has to straighten out. Otherwise, the jury's going to say, well, I'm just too confused. And confusion leads to acquittal. Confusion does not lead to conviction beyond a reasonable doubt, which is the standard here. So I think both sides in their own way scored some points. It's going to be a battle of the experts on some level, but I think it's going to be tough for this jury.
All right, C.K. Hoffler, thank you very much for that. And we're going to go back into the courtroom right now where Judge Regina Chu has called the jury back in, and we expect to hear a rebuttal. The prosecution, with the burden of proof, gets the last word. That's the way it goes in our system, and so we expect to hear from Prosecutor Aaron Eldridge as the jury comes in, essentially trying to answer some of those things that the CK was just talking about and Alex was just talking about, some of the things that defense lawyer Earl Grey raised about the responsibility of Dante Wright in this situation, according to the defense, and about, even to the point, it seems, I expect her to say something about that argument made twice by Earl Grey, that somehow driving away from someone who was shooting you is evidence of your own responsibility. That was the claim of the defense. And it looks like we're going to get Matthew Franks, who's the other prosecutor, closing this case.